My name is Michael Harris. I'm 62 years old, a former construction engineer now living in Austin, Texas, for 20 years. My son Ryan cut me out of his life completely. No calls, no visits, not even a single message. Just silence. But when I became successful and wealthy, suddenly he called, inviting me to Christmas dinner with his family, acting as if nothing had ever happened. I said yes, but not for the reason he thought. I had already prepared a plan. In that warm room filled with fake laughter and forced smiles, Ryan and his wife Claire waited for me to open my leather briefcase, certain there was a check with their names on it. But when they saw what I had actually brought, the color drained from their faces and every smile vanished. Before we continue, make sure to hit subscribe and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. Because what happened next will make you question what family truly means. I had waited 20 years for this moment, and when it finally came, I didn't just reclaim my dignity, I delivered a gift no one expected. And you won't believe what I did next. The call came on a cold December evening in Austin, the kind of night where the air feels sharper than it should, and the city seems to quiet down earlier than usual. I had just finished a simple dinner roast chicken, a glass of red wine, and the hum of the old heater in the background when my phone lit up with a name I never expected to see again. Ryan Harris. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a telemarketer had spoofed his number. Maybe it was some cruel coincidence. My thumb hovered over the answer button, my chest steady but my mind a storm. 20 years of silence, and suddenly, I pressed answer. Dad. That one word cracked something inside me, the way an old photograph makes you realize how much you've forgotten. His voice was older, deeper, but it still carried that same mix I remembered from when he was a boy, charm laced with calculation. I swallowed. Let my words come out slow. This is unexpected. He laughed lightly, the same laugh he used at 12 when he was trying to talk his way out of trouble. Yeah, well, it's been too long. Claire and I were thinking it might be nice if you came over for Christmas dinner. Family time. Family time. He said it like he hadn't spent 2 decades making sure I didn't have one. I let the silence hang long enough for him to get uncomfortable, then he filled it quickly. Like he always did. Claire's making her prime rib. The kids will be there. It would mean a lot. I leaned back in my chair, watching the frost climb my kitchen window, and then he slipped it in, almost too casually. I heard you've been doing really well. Dad, that property deal, congratulations. Must feel good. There it was, the real reason. Not guilt, not reconciliation, opportunity. I took a sip of my wine, then set the glass down carefully. Doing well enough, I said evenly. I'll be there. And after a pause, long enough to let him wonder what I meant, I added, I have a surprise for you. He chuckled, but it wasn't confident. That's great. Dad, can't wait. We hung up. And the kitchen felt like a different room. The air itself had shifted. On the table in front of me was a manila folder I had been building for months. Bank statements, property records, screenshots, even a few photos I'd taken myself. My plan hadn't started with Ryan's call. It had started years earlier, the first time I realized silence could be answered with patience. That night, I sat at the table long after the call ended, staring at that folder, listening to the tick of the clock on the wall, each second deliberate as a hammer. I thought back to the last time I had heard Ryan's voice in person. He was 18, standing in our kitchen, arms crossed, his mother by his side. She told me she was leaving with him. Ryan had looked at me without hesitation and said, Mom's right, you're stuck, always promising things will get better, but they never do. I'm tired of waiting. That was the day I lost my son. The divorce took everything else, the house, the car, but that moment took something deeper. A part of me that believed sacrifice meant loyalty. I had worked overtime shifts, skipped meals, worn the same winter coat 3 years running, just so Ryan could have what he wanted, sneakers, car insurance, gas money. I gave him everything, but it was never enough. For years, I mailed him cards at Christmas, sometimes with a gift, sometimes with cash I couldn't afford. Everyone came back to me unopened, stamped in red, returned to sender. By the 3rd year, I stopped trying. And now, after 2 decades of silence, he wanted me back at his table, not as a father, not as family, as a bank. I looked again at the folder. Inside, it wasn't just numbers. It was the truth. Ryan had been playing a dangerous game. His business ventures weren't the golden opportunities he bragged about to anyone who would listen. I had proof of debts, overdue taxes, shady deals, and investors already circling. His perfect little world was built on sand. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had begged for scraps of connection from him, and now he was coming to me with outstretched hands. The difference was, I wasn't desperate anymore. I wasn't empty. I had rebuilt myself, brick by brick, in silence, and I was ready. Christmas Eve came with cold skies and streets glowing from holiday lights. I shaved carefully, put on my best navy sweater, and polished my shoes until I could see my reflection in them. If Ryan expected me to look like a man beaten down by years of loneliness, he would be disappointed. I wanted to walk into that house looking like a man who had nothing to hide. Driving across town, I passed neighborhoods glowing with decorations, families gathering, children laughing inside fogged-up windows. Ryan's house was in a newer subdivision, rows of near-identical homes, each with their attempt at holiday cheer. His stood out not too much, just enough to look successful. Successful was the image he always cared about. When I pulled up, I saw silhouettes moving through the living room window. I stepped out of the car, snow crunching under my shoes. Before I could knock, Ryan opened the door, grinning like we'd been close all along. "Dad, you made it. Come in." Claire appeared right behind him, smiling wide, her eyes scanning me like she was already calculating. "Michael, it's so good to see you. You look prosperous." I thanked her, handed Ryan my coat, and stepped inside. The warmth from the fireplace rolled over me, cinnamon and roasted meat filling the air. The house was staged like a magazine-spread tree sparkling in the corner, garland draped just right, gifts wrapped with perfect symmetry under the tree. It screamed one message, "Look how well we're doing," but I knew better. Their eyes flicked briefly to the leather briefcase in my hand, and just like that, I knew what they were thinking. Tonight, they expected me to give them exactly what they wanted. But what I had brought wasn't money. It was something far heavier, something that would change everything. The first thing I noticed once I stepped into Ryan's home was how staged everything felt. The chandelier above the dining table gleamed a little too brightly. The garland across the banister draped with precision instead of warmth. Every detail was curated, as if this wasn't Christmas with family, but a performance for an audience that wasn't even there. Ryan took my coat and hung it up with exaggerated care, his smile never faltering. "Dad, I'm glad you came," he said, like he hadn't left me alone for 2 decades. I nodded politely, scanning the room. Claire slipped into the space beside me, perfume trailing just ahead of her. "Cabernet," she said sweetly, pressing a glass into my hand before I could refuse. "I remember you liked that." I took a sip. It was smooth, expensive, meant to impress, meant to disarm. From the corner of my eye, I saw 2 teenagers sitting on the couch, Emily and Noah, my grandchildren, at least. That's what they were supposed to be to me. They looked up briefly, offered polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, then sank back into the glow of their phones. No curiosity, no recognition. You can't miss what you never knew. That moment hit me harder than I expected. Watching those kids, my blood act like I was just another guest, made 20 years collapse all at once. Birthdays missed, graduations unshared, holidays spent alone. The silence I'd endured had shaped them, too. They didn't even know they were missing a grandfather. Ryan clapped his hands lightly, cutting through the tension. "Come on, let's eat." The dining room looked like something out of a catalog. 12 place settings, crystal glasses lined in perfect symmetry, linen napkins folded into triangles so sharp they could cut. This wasn't a cozy family dinner, it was theater. Claire's parents were there, along with a few of their friends. Ryan introduced a man seated near the head of the table as his business partner. No one bothered to explain what the business actually was. The conversation was polished, the laughter rehearsed. Every so often, Ryan steered the topic back toward investments, opportunities, timing the market. He spoke the language of men who wanted more money than they had, the same language I remembered from another man long ago. Robert Weston, my ex-wife's new husband. Years back, he had promised Ryan stability, opportunity, connections. I had watched that man take my family and replace me with shiny promises I couldn't compete with. And now, decades later, Ryan was speaking in the same tone. History doesn't repeat, it mutates. As dinner went on, I played my role quietly, answering when spoken to, watching everything. Claire's smile stayed plastered in place, but her fingers twitched under the tablecloth whenever money was mentioned. Ryan was confident, almost too confident, filling silence with jargon and half-truths. The guests laughed at his jokes, toasted his ambitions, but beneath it all, I could feel the tension humming like an electric wire ready to snap. When dessert was finished and the room began to thin out, Ryan gestured for me to follow him into the den. Claire trailed close behind. The door clicked shut, muting the faint chorus of Christmas music still drifting from the living room. The den was smaller, more personal. Family photos lined the mantel, school portraits of Emily and Noah, holiday snapshots, smiling faces framed just right, but not a single picture of me, not one reminder that I had ever been part of this family. Ryan leaned forward on the couch, elbows on his knees, his voice dropping into something practiced but earnest. So, here's the deal. Dad, we've been working on something big, AI tech, cutting-edge stuff. With the right funding, it could triple in value in a year, Claire chimed in, her tone sliding like silk. We thought, since you've been so successful lately, maybe you'd want to be part of it. There it was, the real invitation, not for Christmas, not for family, for capital. I let the silence stretch. I watched the way Ryan's eyes flicked toward the leather briefcase at my side, the way Claire's hands folded perfectly in her lap, though her thumbs twitched slightly. They were both rehearsed, waiting for me to play my part. Finally, I said, I did bring something for you. Their eyes lit up, just as I knew they would. Ryan leaned closer, the grin he'd worn since childhood spreading across his face like muscle memory. Let's see it, Dad. Funny thing about gifts, I said, resting my hand on the briefcase. The best ones don't always look like much from the outside. Claire's smile sharpened, as long as what's inside is meaningful. I nodded slowly. Oh, it is. I reached for the latches. One click, two. The sound was clean, deliberate, sharp in the quiet of that small room. Ryan leaned even closer, his pupils wide, his breathing shallow, for a second. I almost saw the boy he used to be, the one with scraped knees and big dreams, who once believed me when I said I'd always be there for him. But belief is cheap when it's never been tested. I opened the case, no check, no envelope, no wire transfer papers, just a neat stack of cream folders, each tabbed and labeled. Ryan's grin faltered, Claire's posture stiffened. What is this? Ryan asked, his voice trying and failing to sound casual. Yours, I said evenly. Why don't you start at the top? Ryan picked up the first folder with hesitation, the way someone might touch a snake they weren't sure was dead. He flipped it open, his brow furrowing as the words and numbers began to sink in. Overdue taxes, delinquent payments, default notices from banks he had probably hoped I'd never hear about. His grin vanished completely, replaced by a thin line that pressed hard against his face. Claire leaned closer, scanning the papers with sharp eyes that had no warmth left in them. For a woman who had greeted me at the door with sweetness, her expression now was nothing short of calculation. This isn't what we asked for, Ryan muttered. His voice was low, taut with something close to panic. I leaned back in the chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. No, it's not. I agreed. It's what you needed. Ryan's head jerked up, eyes flashing, needed. I held his gaze, steady and unshaken. You thought you invited me here for money, but what you really invited was the truth. For a moment, silence wrapped the room. The muffled sound of laughter from the dining room floated in, painfully out of place. Ryan flipped another page, then another, his breathing heavier now. Each sheet stripped away another layer of the image he had worked so hard to polish. Claire's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless smile, but her foot tapped nervously against the carpet. Where did you get all this? Ryan finally asked, his voice cracking at the edges. Public record, I replied calmly. And a few friends who still answer my calls. Unlike you, that last line landed harder than I expected. His jaw clenched. But he had no rebuttal. For the first time in years, I saw him without the armor of charm, just a man cornered by his own lies. Claire broke the silence. Michael, I think you're misunderstanding. Ryan's been under a lot of pressure. These documents don't reflect the whole picture. She reached out as if she could close the folder, as if her manicured hand could erase the truth with a single motion. I pulled it back before she touched it. Don't patronize me. Claire, I was a builder my entire life. I know the difference between a house with a strong foundation and one that's about to collapse. This I tapped the papers is already falling. Ryan slammed the folder shut. The sound sharp and ugly. So what, Dad? You came here to humiliate me on Christmas. I let his words hang, feeling their weight. He wanted anger from me, wanted a fight, but anger was a currency I had stopped spending on him years ago. I came here to give you a chance, I said finally. That stopped him cold. His expression flickered with confusion, suspicion, and something almost childlike hope. But hope built on desperation is a fragile thing. A chance for what he asked slowly. To remember who you used to be, I said, before all of this, before the lies. His eyes narrowed, and just like that, the softness vanished. Don't turn this into some moral lesson. If you're not here to help, then why even come? Because you asked me. I said simply, for 20 years, you had no use for me. Now, suddenly, you do. And that tells me one thing: your world is breaking. Claire's voice cut in, sharp as glass. If you won't help, Michael, then leave. We don't need this. But the tremor in her tone betrayed her. She knew as well as I did they did need me, desperately. I stood, picking up the briefcase. Ryan's face went pale, as if he thought I was walking out for good. His voice cracked. Wait! I stopped at the door. Turning back, his eyes were wide, desperate in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy, begging me to fix a toy he had broken. Only now. The toy was his entire life. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question echoed in the room. What did I want 20 years ago? I would have said love, connection, respect, but those years had taught me something different. What I wanted now wasn't his apology, or even reconciliation. It was the truth, and the chance to protect the two innocent faces I'd seen scrolling on their phones, unaware of the storm around them. I looked at him, then at Claire, whose mask of confidence was beginning to crumble. I don't want anything from you, I said slowly, but your children deserve better. Their names Emily and Noah hung on my tongue, but I didn't speak them yet, not here, not now. That part of the plan wasn't ready to surface. Ryan slumped back into the couch, running both hands through his hair. His bravado was gone, stripped bare by the weight of the documents staring back at him. Claire's jaw tightened, her eyes darting between us like a cornered animal. For the first time in 2 decades, I had the power, not because I was wealthy, not because of the folder, but because I finally stopped needing anything from him. I set the briefcase back down gently. You invited me for Christmas, I said, so here I am. You wanted me to bring something. I did. Ryan didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, shoulders hunched, a man built on pride collapsing under silence. And as I stood there, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't revenge. Not really. It was a reckoning. A mirror held up after 20 years, showing my son the reflection he'd worked so hard to avoid. And the night was only just beginning. I left Ryan and Claire sitting in the den with their silence and stepped back into the glow of the dining room. The laughter from the other guests faltered when they saw my face. Or maybe it was because Ryan and Claire hadn't followed me back out. Either way, the atmosphere shifted, just slightly, the way a house creaks before a storm. Claire's parents were at the table, sipping wine like they hadn't noticed the tension. But I knew they had. People who live around money, or the illusion of it, always notice tension. It's a threat to the performance. Ryan came out a moment later, his face red, his smile stretched too tight. Sorry about that, he said to the room. A little too loud, just a private conversation. Everything's fine. But nothing about him looked fine. His collar sat uneven. His eyes darted to me and away again. Claire followed, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture meant to reassure, but her eyes betrayed her, sharp and restless. The guests filled the silence with chatter, but it was thin and awkward, like tissue paper over broken glass. I sat back down at the table, my leather briefcase resting at my side. Nobody asked what was inside, but I caught more than one glance toward it. Emily and Noah wandered in from the living room. Drawn by the noise, they slid into their seats, phones in hand, barely looking at anyone. For them, this was just another dinner. They didn't know their father's empire was cracking right beneath the tablecloth. Ryan raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice shaking only slightly. "To family, to new beginnings, to opportunity." Everyone lifted their glasses. I did too, though I didn't drink. His words weren't a toast, they were a plea. Dinner resumed, dishes passed, forks clinking against porcelain, but every conversation seemed to bend back toward me. "So, Michael, what line of work are you in now?" one guest asked, voice oily with curiosity. "Construction," I answered simply. "Built buildings, then built myself back up when no one else would." Ryan jumped in quickly. "He's being modest. Dad's done really well for himself. Property investments, right? Must be incredible." His eagerness stung. For years, he hadn't cared where I lived, what I ate, whether I survived the winter. Now, he couldn't stop advertising my success like it was his own. Claire leaned forward, her smile polite but her eyes gleaming. "Michael, Ryan was just telling us about a new business venture. It's really promising. With the right backing, it could transform everything." Her words weren't meant for the table. They were meant for me. Every syllable was bait, dangled in front of the man she thought was desperate for connection. I set down my fork carefully, the sound of metal against porcelain louder than it should have been. "I don't doubt Ryan has ideas," I said slowly, "but ideas without foundation collapse." The table went quiet. Ryan's jaw tightened. Claire's parents exchanged a quick glance, then looked away. The silence broke when Emily finally spoke, her voice flat, not looking up from her phone. "Dad, do we have to do this now?" The words cut through everything. She wasn't defending me or him. She was just tired of the performance, the endless posturing. For a moment, Ryan's mask slipped, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes too. But then he straightened, forcing a laugh. "Kids, right? Always on their phones." The guests chuckled politely, but the spell had broken. The evening was unraveling thread by thread. I could have stopped there. I could have let him keep his illusion for one more night. But 20 years of silence had taught me the cost of pretending. I cleared my throat. "You all should know something." Every head turned. Ryan froze. Claire's smile hardened. I looked at the table, at the polished silverware and the expensive china. I thought of all the years I'd spent alone at Christmas, eating takeout under a dim kitchen light, wondering if my son would ever call. And I realized this was my chance not for revenge, but for truth. "Ryan's business isn't what he says it is," I said evenly. "There are debts, serious ones. Some of you already know. Some of you will soon." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. One of the guests coughed awkwardly. Claire's mother set down her glass too quickly, the stem clinking against the table. Ryan slammed his hand down. "Enough!" His voice cracked, anger spilling out like water through a dam. "Dad doesn't know what he's talking about. He's old, he's bitter, and he's trying to ruin me." But even as he spoke, I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe him, not fully. Doubt had already crept in, and doubt spreads fast. Claire reached for his arm, but he shook her off. His mask was gone now, replaced by raw fury. "You think you can waltz in here after 20 years and destroy me? You're nothing. You've always been nothing." The words landed like blows, but they didn't break me, not anymore. I stood slowly, picking up the briefcase. "Maybe," I said softly, "or maybe I just stopped letting you define me." And then I turned toward Emily and Noah. They looked up for the first time all night, eyes wide, confused. They didn't know what was happening, but they felt the shift in the air. I smiled gently at them, a smile I hadn't worn in years. One day, I thought, they'll know the truth, not the polished story their father tells, but the one written in silence, patience, and resilience. The night wasn't over, not by a long shot. The room was ice, not the kind you feel outside on a December night, but the kind that creeps under your skin when words land like stones, and no one knows what to say next. Ryan's outburst hung in the air, heavy and jagged, and no amount of holiday decor could soften it. Claire tried to salvage the moment. She forced a laugh, too sharp, too brittle. "Michael, You've had too much wine. Let's not spoil Christmas with all this nonsense. But her hands betrayed her, gripping the stem of her glass until her knuckles turned white. I stayed standing, the briefcase in my hand, steady as stone. I hadn't touched the wine since my first sip. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't confused, and everyone at that table could see it. One of the guests finally spoke up. A man I hadn't been introduced to. His voice was cautious. "Is this true, Ryan?" Ryan's eyes burned holes into me, but he plastered a smile onto his face. "Of course not. My father's bitter, that's all. He was never there for me. So now he wants to drag me down." The irony nearly made me laugh. Never there for him, I'd worked every overtime shift I could get my hands on to pay for his sneakers, his first car, his college tuition until he dropped out. But none of that mattered now. He had rewritten the story long ago, and I was just the villain in his version. I looked around the table, catching each gaze, letting the silence settle. "Ryan thinks this is about money," I said evenly, "but it's about the truth. 20 years. He cut me out of his life, and now that the walls are closing in, suddenly I'm useful again." The words hit their mark. I saw it in the way Claire's mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair, the way the business partner's smile faltered. Doubt was spreading like wildfire, and Ryan knew it. He shoved back his chair, standing so fast it nearly toppled. "You think you're some hero. Dad, you're pathetic. You couldn't hold a marriage together. You couldn't keep me. And now you want to come crawling back, waving your little folder like it makes you important." The venom in his voice didn't sting the way it once would have. I had spent too many years bleeding from words like those. Now, I just looked at him and saw a man unraveling. "I didn't come here to crawl back," I said softly. "I came here to show you who you really are." The silence cracked when Emily's voice broke through, soft and uncertain. "Dad, is it true?" Every head turned. The girl had barely spoken all night, but those words cut deeper than anything I'd said. Ryan froze, caught between anger and fear. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Claire jumped in quickly. "Sweetheart, don't listen. Your grandfather doesn't know what he's talking about." But Emily's eyes stayed locked on her father, searching for something in his face. And in that silence, I knew the illusion was breaking, even for his own children. Noah finally looked up from his phone, frowning. "What's going on?" Ryan snapped. "Nothing. Eat your dessert." The boy's face fell, confusion turning to quiet hurt for a moment. The room wasn't about money or revenge or pride. It was about two kids caught in a storm they hadn't asked for, and that was when I knew exactly why I was here. I set the briefcase gently on the table, the latch clicking like a gavel. "Inside this case is proof," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "Proof of debts, proof of lies, proof that everything you've been told about Ryan's success is a mask." Ryan lunged forward, slamming the case shut before anyone else could look inside. "Enough," his voice cracked. "Desperate now. Nobody needs to see this." But his desperation spoke louder than I ever could. The damage was done. His guests leaned back, their trust shaken. Claire's lips trembled, fury and fears warring in her eyes. I picked up the briefcase once more, but this time I didn't open it. I just looked at my son, steady and unshaken. I waited 20 years for this moment. "Ryan, not to destroy you, to free myself." He glared at me, chest heaving, face flushed with rage. "You're nothing to me. You always will be." I nodded slowly. "Then nothing is exactly what I'll give you." And with that, I turned toward the door. Every step echoed like a verdict. The guests whispered. Claire's parents exchanged sharp looks, and Emily's wide eyes followed me as I left the room. At the coat rack, I pulled on my jacket with deliberate calm. The night air outside would be cold, but not colder than the years I had already lived through. Behind me, I heard Ryan's voice rising, frantic, pleading with his guests to stay, to believe him. But the cracks in his performance were too wide now. The facade was collapsing, brick by brick. I stepped out into the winter night, the briefcase still in my hand. The stars above Austin glimmered faintly, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. But as I reached the car, I glanced back at the window. Emily stood there, watching me, her face pale and unsure. Our eyes met for a brief second before she turned away. And in that moment, I knew my work wasn't finished. Ryan had made his choice long ago, but Emily and Noah, maybe they still had a chance at the truth. The reckoning had begun, and it was only the first step. The cold air hit me as I stepped off their porch, sharp against my face, but it felt cleansing for a moment. I thought that was it, the ending I had been waiting 20 years for. I had said my piece, dropped the truth in their laps, and walked away. Closure. Right. But then I remembered Emily's eyes staring at me through the window, wide, searching, not with judgment, but with a question she didn't dare ask. And Noah, barely old enough to understand, but old enough to feel something wasn't right. Their faces clung to me long after I sat behind the wheel of my car. I started the engine, but I didn't drive. My hands rested on the steering wheel as the house glowed behind me, its lights warm, its laughter now hollow. I had come prepared to face my son, but I hadn't been prepared for the ache of seeing my grandchildren lost in his shadow. I thought back to the folder in my briefcase. All the records, the debts, the proof. That was for Ryan. But tucked in a smaller compartment was something else, 2 envelopes, each with a name written neatly in my handwriting. Emily, Noah. For months I'd been working with an attorney, setting up trust accounts in their names. Quiet, careful, untouchable. If Ryan's empire fell, and I knew it would, at least his children wouldn't be left with nothing. They deserved a future built on truth, not on lies and borrowed money. I shut off the engine and sat there, my breath fogging the windshield. Walking away would have been easier, cleaner, but I had learned the hard way that silence leaves scars. I couldn't stay silent with them, not again. So I grabbed the briefcase and stepped back out into the night. Through the curtains, I saw the party unraveling, guests gathering coats, Claire pacing, Ryan talking too fast, his hands moving wildly as if he could rebuild his mask with gestures alone. The scene was chaos wrapped in Christmas lights. I rang the doorbell. Claire opened it, her smile gone, her eyes sharp as glass. "What are you doing back?" she hissed. I met her gaze steadily. I came to see my grandchildren. For a moment, I thought she might slam the door, but Emily's voice called from behind her. "Mom, let him in." Claire hesitated, then stepped aside with a bitter sigh. "Fine, 5 minutes." Inside, the house was no longer glowing with false warmth. Guests were leaving, avoiding eye contact. Ryan stood near the fireplace, red-faced, his tie loose, his voice strained as he muttered reassurances to the few stragglers who hadn't fled yet. He saw me and nearly exploded. "Dad, get out!" I ignored him and turned to Emily and Noah. They were standing by the tree, their phones forgotten for once. I knelt down, setting the briefcase gently on the floor. "I'm your grandfather," I said softly. "I know you don't know me, but I've known you every birthday, every Christmas, every year that passed I thought of you." Emily frowned, her arms crossed, but her eyes flickered with something fragile. "Why didn't you ever come?" The question sliced deeper than any of Ryan's words ever had. I swallowed hard. "Because your father didn't let me. He didn't want me in your lives." Ryan stormed forward, his voice booming. "Don't listen to him. He's trying to poison you against me." But Emily didn't look at him. She looked at me, and I saw it then, the doubt already growing in her. Noah's eyes darted between us, confused but listening. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the 2 envelopes. "These are for you," I said, handing one to each of them. "They're not gifts you can open tonight. They're for your future, for when you're ready." Ryan tried to snatch them from my hands, but I stood, tall and steady, blocking him with a look that stopped him cold. "Not this time. Ryan." Claire grabbed his arm, hissing under her breath, reminding him the guests were still watching. He froze, fists clenched, chest heaving. Emily held her envelope carefully, her fingers trembling. Noah clutched his like it was a secret too heavy for him to carry. I looked at them both, my voice low but clear. "No matter what happens, remember this: you deserve better than lies, and you are not responsible for the choices your father made." For a second, the world seemed to hold still. Claire's glare could have cut glass. Ryan's fury burned like a furnace. But Emily's eyes shone with something else. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity. A door cracked open where a wall had been. I knew then that I had done what I came for. Not revenge, not humiliation, legacy, a chance to plant seeds of truth in soil that had been poisoned too long. I picked up the briefcase, nodded once to the room, and turned toward the door again. Ryan's voice followed me, venomous and broken. "You'll regret this, old man." But I didn't, for the first time in 20 years. I walked away not carrying his shadow, but leaving mine behind. Outside, the night was colder, the stars brighter. I slid into the car, placed the briefcase beside me, and finally drove. Every mile between me and that house felt like lifting another weight off my shoulders. And yet, as the city lights blurred past, I couldn't shake the thought of Emily's eyes when she asked me why I never came. That question would haunt me, but maybe, just maybe, the envelopes in their hands would give her an answer. The reckoning wasn't just mine anymore, it was theirs too, and it had only begun. I thought leaving that night would be the end of it, but the truth has a way of spreading faster than any lie. Within days, the cracks in Ryan's carefully built world split wide open. The first call came from a former colleague of mine, someone who had sat quietly at that Christmas table. "Michael," he said, "you were right, I should have known." He didn't go into details, but I didn't need them. Word was out. By New Year's, Ryan's business partner had pulled out of their venture. Then came the banks, calling in loans, demanding payments he couldn't make. The polished facade he had built house, cars, the dinners staged like magazine spreads started collapsing in real time. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate, I just watched, quietly. The way a man watches a storm he's seen coming for years finally roll in. But what weighed on me more than Ryan's downfall was Emily and Noah. I hadn't seen them since Christmas night, but they stayed in my thoughts constantly. Were they angry at me? Confused? Did they even open the envelopes I had given them? The answer came 2 weeks later, in the form of a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, her jacket zipped to her chin, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. She looked older than her 15 years, carrying a weight that shouldn't belong to a child. Behind her, Noah stood uncertain, his eyes wide and cautious. "Can we come in?" she asked. I stepped aside without a word. Inside, they sat on my couch, awkward, restless. Finally, Emily pulled an envelope from her pocket and the one I had given her. She held it out, unopened. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice steady but shaking underneath. I want to know if what you said was true about Dad." Her words cut me deeper than I expected. This wasn't about money. It was about trust, about a child trying to piece together which parts of her world were real. I sat across from them, choosing my words carefully. "Everything I gave you is for your future, not to buy your trust. As for your dad, I wish I could tell you he's the man he wants you to believe he is, but he's not." Noah frowned, hugging a pillow against his chest. "He said you left us." I shook my head slowly. "No, he left me. And in the process, he left you too." The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. Emily looked down at the envelope again, tracing the edge with her finger. "Finally," she whispered. "Mom's been fighting with him every night. She said you ruined everything." I swallowed hard. Maybe I did. Or maybe I just showed her the truth she already knew. For the first time, Emily's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. A tired, fragile smile, but real. I spent the next hour just talking to them. Not about Ryan, not about the past, but about them, their school, their friends, the little details of their lives that no one had ever shared with me. Noah liked drawing. Emily was on her school's debate team. Things I should have known years ago, but was hearing for the first time. When they left, Emily slipped the envelope back into her pocket. She didn't promise to open it. She didn't have to. The fact that she had brought it to me at all told me she wasn't ready to let me go. Ryan, on the other hand, wasn't done. He called me 3 nights later, his voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "You think you've won, don't you? You humiliated me. You turned my kids against me." I stayed quiet, letting him burn through the fury. When he finally stopped, breathing heavy on the other end, I said only this: "I didn't turn them against you, Ryan. You did that all by yourself." The line went dead. From that moment, he disappeared from my life again. No calls, no visits, nothing. Only this time, it wasn't silence that hurt, it was silence that freed me. Weeks turned into months. Ryan's house went up for sale, his cars repossessed, his name whispered in circles that once praised him. But Emily and Noah came by more often, sometimes with questions, sometimes just to sit and talk. Each visit stitched something back into me I thought had been lost forever. One evening, as spring crept into Austin, Emily looked at me across my small kitchen table. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "do you regret it?" "Regret what?" I asked. "Telling the truth." I thought about it for a long moment, then shook my head. No. Because the truth isn't what destroyed your father. It's what finally set me free. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening, and for the first time since that Christmas night, I felt something I hadn't dared hope for: belonging. Ryan had lost everything trying to chase an image. But in his collapse, I had found something far greater: my place, not as his father, but as their grandfather. And that, I realized, was the gift I'd been waiting 20 years to receive. Spring turned into summer, and for the first time in decades, I found myself living a life that felt less like surviving and more like healing. Ryan had faded into the background. His name occasionally popped up in local business gossip, usually tied to failure or debt. But I stopped keeping score. What mattered now was what I had gained. Emily and Noah, they began coming by more often, at first with hesitation, then with ease. Sometimes they came together, sometimes Emily came alone, carrying her debate notes to practice aloud while I listened. Noah brought his sketchbook, shyly showing me drawings he swore weren't good enough, though I saw talent bursting from the pages. I became the quiet constant in their lives, the way I should have been all along. They didn't need grand gestures or expensive gifts, they needed presence. Someone to look at them and truly see them, and that was something I could finally give without anyone taking it away. One Saturday, Emily asked if I could come watch her at a debate tournament. Her voice carried that careful tone teenagers use when they're afraid of rejection, as if they're preparing for a no before the question even lands. I didn't hesitate, of course. She smiled, just barely, and it was enough to remind me why I had come back in the first place. That weekend, sitting in a school auditorium filled with nervous kids in blazers and parents clutching coffee cups, I watched my granddaughter stand tall and deliver her arguments with precision and fire. She was brilliant. She was fearless. And when her eyes flicked toward the crowd and found me, just for a second, I knew my presence mattered more than any victory. Afterward, she handed me the ribbon she'd earned for second place. "You should keep it," she said. I shook my head. "No, that's yours." But she pressed it into my palm anyway, whispering, "I want you to have it." It was the kind of moment I had missed for 20 years, and it made every wound, every silence, every lonely Christmas worth enduring. But life doesn't stay in perfect balance. Ryan eventually reappeared. It happened one evening when I was walking back from the grocery store, a bag of apples and bread in my hands. He was leaning against his car near my apartment, thinner than I remembered, his eyes hollow. "Dad," he said, his voice stripped of its old arrogance, "I need to talk." I almost kept walking, but something in his tone stopped me. We sat on the bench outside my building. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally, he muttered, "I lost everything. The house, the cars, Claire's gone. Took the kids." My chest tightened. "Took the kids." He nodded miserably. "She left a few weeks ago. Said she was done." I studied him, searching for sincerity, for once. There was no performance, no polished mask, just a broken man. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I don't know where else to go." His voice cracked. "I thought maybe you'd help me." The irony was staggering. After years of silence, after inviting me back only to exploit me, after lashing out in front of his children now, at rock bottom, he turned to me. I let out a long breath. "I can't fix what you broke, Ryan." His shoulders sagged. "So, that's it. You're just going to watch me drown." I shook my head slowly. "No. But I won't hand you a life raft if you're going to burn it again. If you want my help, you need to start with the truth." His eyes flicked toward me, filled with shame. I don't even know where to start. I looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Start with your kids." He flinched, but he didn't argue. That night, after he left, I lay awake thinking, Part of me wanted to lock the door forever, to let him sink under the weight of his own choices. But another part remembered Emily's question, do you regret it? Maybe walking away from him entirely would be easier, but regret grows in silence. And I had promised myself I'd never let silence write my story again. A week later, Emily and Noah came by. We sat in my small kitchen, laughter spilling easily as Noah showed me his newest sketches. Then Emily grew quiet. Mom says Dad's gone. She whispered, do you know where he is? I looked at her, at the fear and hope tangled in her eyes, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them, about breaking the cycle before it swallowed another generation. He's trying, I said carefully. I don't know if it will be enough, but he's trying. Emily nodded slowly. She didn't ask for more, but the way she leaned against me as we watched Noah draw told me everything. Maybe Ryan would never change. Maybe he would. That wasn't mine to control anymore. What I could control was this being present, being steady, being the grandfather they needed. And for the first time in 20 years, that was enough. The weeks after Ryan's collapse unfolded like the quiet after a storm. The damage was still there, broken branches, scattered debris, but the air felt clearer, lighter, for the first time in 20 years. I wasn't walking through life with bitterness burning in my chest. Instead, I was watching something new take root. Emily and Noah started coming to my apartment almost every weekend. Sometimes they stayed for dinner, sometimes just an hour. It didn't matter how long. What mattered was that they came at all. Each visit chipped away at the years I'd lost, building a bridge I thought had collapsed forever. One Saturday morning, Emily sat at my kitchen table with her debate notes spread out, her pen tapping against the page. "Grandpa," she said without looking up, "do you ever wish things had been different with Dad?" Her question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything we'd been through. I leaned back, thinking carefully. "Yes," I said. "I wish he'd chosen differently. I wish he'd chosen honesty, and love, and family, but wishing doesn't change who he is." She nodded, chewing on her lip. "Do you think people can change?" I looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, the hope she was almost afraid to admit. "Maybe," I said, "but change has to come from inside. You can't force it." For a moment, she was silent, then she whispered, "I don't know if I believe he ever will." I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over hers. "That's okay. You don't have to. What matters is who you choose to be." Noah, sitting nearby with his sketchbook, piped up without looking up. "I don't care if he changes. He yells too much." The blunt honesty of children, Emily smiled faintly, and I couldn't help but laugh. In those moments, I realized something. My story with Ryan might never have the ending I once wanted, but with Emily and Noah, I had a new beginning. That summer, I took them to Barton Springs in Austin. The water was cold, shockingly so, but we spent the day splashing, laughing, eating sandwiches under the shade of the trees, for once. They weren't caught in the crossfire of their parents' arguments. They were just kids, and I was just their grandfather. But Ryan wasn't gone completely. He called me again in late July, his voice ragged. "Dad, I'm in trouble. I need money." I closed my eyes, the ache of old wounds pressing down. "Ryan," I said, "I can't keep rescuing you from yourself." He cursed, raged, tried to twist the knife with the same words he'd used my whole life. "You're worthless. You're not a real father." But for the first time, those words slid right off me. I had heard them too many times to let them pierce anymore. I hung up without another word. That night, Emily texted me, "Mom says Dad's gone again. We don't know where." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "You and Noah are safe. That's what matters." Because that was the truth. I couldn't fix Ryan, but I could protect them. I could give them a foundation no one could take away. By August, Emily had opened her envelope. She didn't say it out loud, but I knew. She started asking questions about college, about scholarships, about what she could study. Noah started talking about art classes, their futures, once clouded by their father's instability, were beginning to take shape. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, Emily looked at me and said, "Grandpa, do you regret waiting so long?" I thought about all the lonely Christmases, the birthdays missed, the silence that had stretched for 2 decades. Then I thought about this moment, her sitting across from me, Noah doodling beside us, the sound of laughter drifting in from the open window. "No," I said softly, "because if I hadn't waited, maybe we wouldn't be here now." She tilted her head, studying me. "You mean it?" I smiled. "I do. Life doesn't give us perfect timing. It just gives us moments." And this, I gestured to the small kitchen, the cluttered table, the two of them with me. "This is ours." Her eyes shimmered, and she leaned across the table, hugging me without warning. It was quick, a little awkward, but it was real. The first hug I'd gotten from her, the first bridge rebuilt. As the evening settled, I realized something profound. My story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about exposing Ryan or watching his empire crumble. It was about reclaiming what I had lost, not from him, but for myself, and for them. Ryan's downfall wasn't my victory. Emily and Noah's future was. That night, as I sat in the quiet after they had gone home, I finally felt the peace I had been chasing for 20 years. The silence in my apartment didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt earned. It felt whole. And for the first time, I knew exactly how this chapter of my life would end, not with bitterness, but with love. Fall rolled in quietly, with crisp mornings and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. My life had found a rhythm I never thought possible. No chaos, no constant ache of being unwanted, just the steady beat of family, rebuilt one weekend at a time. Emily and Noah had become fixtures in my days. Emily would drop by after school, sometimes just to sit at the kitchen table and do homework, her presence filling the silence that once haunted me. Noah would bring sketches, proudly showing me superheroes he'd invented, or landscapes from his imagination. Every drawing he handed me felt like a gift, proof that he was building a world untouched by his father's lies. One Sunday afternoon, as we baked cookies together in my small kitchen, Emily asked the question I had been waiting for. "Grandpa, do you think Dad will ever come back?" I paused, wiping flour from my hands, and looked at her. Her eyes held hope and dread all at once, the way only a teenager caught between loyalty and truth can feel. "Maybe," I said carefully, "but the real question is, if he does, what will you want from him?" She bit her lip, thinking. "Finally," she whispered, "just honesty." It broke my heart, because it was the one thing Ryan had never given her. That night, after they left, I sat with their words echoing in my mind for so long. My fight had been with Ryan, his rejection, his cruelty, his absence, but now I realized it wasn't about him anymore. It was about what came next, about the legacy I would leave behind, not the battles I had survived. Weeks later, I was sitting in a cafe when a familiar voice broke through the clatter of cups and chatter. Dad. Ryan stood there, thinner, worn, his once polished look gone. His eyes were tired, his hands restless. He slid into the seat across from me without waiting for an invitation. "I heard the kids come to see you," he said, his tone flat. "They come because they want to," I replied. He scoffed. "You think you've replaced me?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I could never replace you. I can only be what you chose not to be." His jaw tightened. "You gave them money, didn't you? That's why they're there." I looked him straight in the eye. "I gave them something you never did. Stability and a choice." For a moment, I thought he'd explode again, but instead, his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "I messed up," he muttered, almost to himself. I leaned forward. "Ryan, it's not too late to change, but you have to want it, not for me, not even for them, for yourself." His eyes flicked up, searching my face for judgment. For once, I offered none, just truth. We sat in silence for a long time. When he finally stood, he didn't make promises, he didn't apologize, he just said, "I'll think about it." I didn't expect a miracle, but even that sliver of honesty felt like more than I'd gotten in 20 years. As the holidays approached again, Emily and Noah insisted I spend Thanksgiving with them. Claire wasn't thrilled, but she didn't stop them, sitting at their table, watching them laugh and eat. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: belonging. Emily raised her glass of sparkling cider and looked at me. "To family," she said softly, "real family." The words nearly undid me. I thought back to the man I was the Christmas before, walking into Ryan's house with a briefcase full of proof, ready for battle. And now, here I was, surrounded not by lies but by love. The journey hadn't given me the son I once longed for, but it had given me something even better, a future with his children. Later that night, as I drove home, the city lights glowing against the dark Texas sky, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means letting go of the weight you've carried too long. Ryan might never change. He might never show up the way his kids deserve. But I had. And in doing so, I had rewritten the ending of my story. The silence that had once defined my life was gone, replaced by the laughter of two grandchildren who chose me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And for me, that was more than enough. Winter returned, and with it came the memories of that Christmas night, the night I walked into Ryan's house with a briefcase full of truth. But this year was different. Instead of dreading the season, I found myself looking forward to it, not because of presents or lights or carols, but because of Emily and Noah. They asked me weeks in advance if I would come to their Christmas morning, not as an outsider, not as a guest, as family. When I arrived at their smaller rental house, the one Claire had moved them into after leaving Ryan, I was greeted not by silence, but by laughter, spilling out into the yard. Emily flung open the door, cheeks flushed, wearing a sweater far too big for her. Noah darted past her, waving a toy plane, his voice rising in excitement. "Grandpa's here!" Inside, the tree was modest, the decorations a mix of handmade crafts and old ornaments Claire had saved, but it was warm in a way Ryan's mansion had never been. Claire offered me a polite smile, still cautious, but there was no venom this time, just acceptance. Emily dragged me to the couch, making me sit between her and Noah as they opened their gifts. They wanted me there, in the middle of it all, as though I had always been, and for the first time in decades. I didn't feel like a shadow at someone else's table. I felt like I belonged. Halfway through the morning, Emily reached under the tree and handed me a small package. Wrapped in crinkled paper, "We made this for you," she said. Inside was a picture frame, handmade from popsicle sticks painted red and green. Inside the frame was a photo one Claire had taken weeks earlier when we baked cookies together. Emily's arm draped around my shoulders, Noah holding up a tray of misshapen cookies, all of us laughing. My throat tightened. I had no words, only gratitude. For years I had dreamed of moments like this, and now, here it was real, tangible, something I could hold in my hands. But not every ghost stays gone. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Claire asked if she could speak with me privately. She led me to the kitchen, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Ryan called. She said, "He wants to see the kids." Her voice was steady, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I don't know if I should let him. I took a deep breath. I can't make that choice for you, Claire, but I can tell you this, the kids are stronger than he thinks. They see through more than he realizes. She nodded, chewing on her lip. "Do you think he's really changed?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "I don't know, but I do know this, they deserve the truth, not another performance." Later that night, as I drove home under a sky lit with stars, I thought about Ryan, about the broken man who had once stood in front of me, begging for help. I wondered if he ever thought about the life he'd thrown away, or the children who were slipping out of his grasp. Part of me wanted to believe he could change. Part of me knew he wouldn't, but for the first time, that battle wasn't mine to fight anymore. A week later, Emily showed up at my apartment, her face pale. Dad came by. She said softly, "He tried to talk to me." I set down the mug in my hands. "What did he say?" She shrugged, tears brimming in her eyes. "He said he wanted another chance, but he didn't sound real. He sounded like he always does, like he was saying what he thought I wanted to hear." I pulled her into a hug, holding her close as she shook. "You don't owe him anything," I whispered. "You get to decide what place he has in your life. Not him, not me. You." She pulled back, wiping her cheeks. "Do you think he'll ever really see me?" I looked into her eyes and answered with the only truth I had. "Maybe, but whether he does or not, I see you." Her smile was faint, fragile, but it was enough. As she left that night, I realized something. Ryan's story might not have an ending yet, but mine did. And it wasn't one of revenge or bitterness. It was one of presence, of rebuilding, of being exactly what Emily and Noah needed. The man I used to be, the man begging for his son's love, was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone finally free. That Christmas, I didn't just gain back family, I gained myself. The new year dawned quietly, not with the chaos of Ryan's empire crumbling, but with the soft rhythm of family dinners, school updates, and laughter echoing in my once empty apartment. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to break. I felt like I was building. Emily had started calling me almost every evening. Sometimes it was about debate practice, sometimes just to share a story from her day. Noah sent me pictures of his sketches over text-shaky photos, poorly lit, but each one a glimpse into his imagination. I printed them out and pinned them to my wall like an art gallery. They turned my apartment from a place of solitude into a home. Then came the call I knew would arrive sooner or later. It was late on a Thursday night. Ryan's number flashed across my phone screen. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said I should. "Dad," he said, his voice heavy, stripped of anger. "I'm in rehab." I sat there in silence, unsure what to say. He went on, his words tumbling out awkwardly. I needed to tell someone. They said to call family. And you're the only one left." My first instinct was bitterness. Family now. I was family, but beneath the anger, there was a flicker of something else. Pity, maybe, or the remnants of a love I'd buried years ago. "I don't know what you expect me to say." "Ryan," I replied carefully. Just don't hang up," he whispered. "Please." So I didn't. I let him talk. He rambled about mistakes, about losing everything, about the kids. He didn't ask for money. He didn't even ask for forgiveness. He just wanted to be heard. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the quiet phone in my hand. For 20 years, I had wanted him to admit his failures, and now, in a sterile rehab facility somewhere, he finally had, but instead of triumph, all I felt was exhaustion. The next day, Emily showed up at my apartment. She must have seen something in my face because she asked immediately, "He called you, didn't he?" I nodded. Her shoulders slumped. Did he sound different? I hesitated, then answered truthfully. He sounded broken. She was quiet for a long time, then said softly, "I don't know if I want to see him, but I don't hate him. I just don't trust him." I pulled her close. "That's enough. You don't have to hate him. You don't have to forgive him. You just have to protect yourself." Over the next few months, Ryan stayed in rehab. Sometimes he called, sometimes he didn't. I never promised him anything, but I listened. Maybe that was all I could give him. Meanwhile, my bond with Emily and Noah only deepened. I attended every debate round I could, clapping the loudest even when Emily rolled her eyes at me. I framed Noah's best drawing and hung it in my living room. These small things, these ordinary acts of love, became extraordinary because they had been absent for so long. One evening, after a long day, I sat on my balcony watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Emily called, her voice excited. "Grandpa, guess what I won first place at the tournament?" I felt tears prick my eyes. "I'm so proud of you," I said, "more than you'll ever know." In that moment, I realized the truth. Ryan's story didn't have to define me anymore. His choices, his cruelty, his downfall. They were his burden, not mine. My legacy wasn't tied to him. It was tied to the two lives that had chosen me. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That night, as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For years, I had seen a man hollowed out by rejection. But now, staring back at me was someone whole, someone free. And I finally understood revenge hadn't been about destroying Ryan. It had been about reclaiming myself, about proving, if only to me, that I was worth loving, worth remembering, worth being part of a family again. The silence that haunted me for 2 decades was gone. In its place was the sound of my granddaughter's laughter, my grandson's drawings, and the knowledge that I had broken the cycle. And for me, that was the greatest victory of all. Spring returned, softer than the last, and I noticed the difference not in the weather, but in myself. I woke each morning without the weight of bitterness pressing on my chest. Instead of silence, my days were filled with the rhythm of phone calls, visits, and the ordinary magic of being wanted. Emily had taken to visiting after school on Thursdays, bringing her laptop and a pile of papers to work on her debate cases. She claimed she concentrated better at my apartment than at home. Truthfully, I think she just wanted the quiet and the safety. Noah would often tag along, sketchbook in hand, sprawling across my living room floor while humming tunes under his breath. These afternoons became my anchor, a far cry from the Christmas night when I had walked back into Ryan's life armed with proof and rage. I had expected confrontation to heal me, but instead it was these small, ordinary acts of love that stitched me back together. Then one Thursday, Emily closed her laptop suddenly and looked straight at me. "Grandpa," she asked, "do you think I'm strong enough to face him?" I set down the coffee mug I'd been holding. "Him, Ryan." Her voice was steady, but her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "He keeps calling. Mom ignores him, but part of me thinks I should hear him out." My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect her, to shield her from the man who had wounded me so deeply. But another part of me remembered what it felt like to never have a choice, to have Ryan dictate the story for me. I took a breath. "You're stronger than he'll ever admit, Emily, and whether you choose to see him or not, that's your decision, not his." She nodded, her eyes glistening, and for a moment I saw not just the granddaughter I had come to know, but the woman she was becoming. That weekend, she asked me to go with her. We met Ryan in the visiting room of the rehab center. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched, his hands shaking as he reached for a cup of water. When Emily walked in, his eyes filled with tears. "Emily," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry." She didn't rush to him. She didn't collapse in tears. She stood tall, her arms crossed, her voice steady. "You hurt us. You lied. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Ryan broke then, sobbing into his hands. For years, I had imagined what it would be like to see him humbled. But in that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something else release. Emily glanced at me, and I gave a small nod. She sat across from Ryan, not forgiving, not forgetting, but listening. And that was more power than I had ever managed in my years of silence. Afterward, in the car, Emily leaned back in her seat. "I don't hate him," she said softly, "but I don't need him either." Those words, simple and firm, felt like a chain snapping free, for her, for me. In the weeks that followed, she carried herself differently, stronger. Noah, too, began to flourish, his drawings more vibrant, his laughter freer. The shadow Ryan had cast over them was fading. One evening, Emily handed me a sealed envelope. "For you," she said. Inside was a handwritten letter. Her words wavered here and there, but the message was clear. "Thank you for showing up. Thank you for not giving up. You're the grandfather I always wanted, even before I knew you." Tears blurred the page as I read. I had spent 2 decades waiting for a son who never came, but here, in shaky teenage handwriting, was the redemption I had been chasing all along. That night, as the sun set over Austin, I sat on my balcony with the letter in my lap and Noah's drawing of a tree taped to my wall. For the first time, I didn't think about what I had lost. I thought about what I had gained. Ryan's story would go on messy, uncertain, perhaps doomed, but mine had reached a turning point. Revenge hadn't been about watching him fall. It had been about rising again myself and giving Emily and Noah the foundation Ryan never could. And as I looked at the fading horizon, I finally understood sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's healing. It's proving that love can outlast the lies. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. The weeks after Emily's letter felt different, not because the world outside had changed, but because something inside me finally had. For years, I had defined myself by what Ryan had taken from me, my dignity, my role as a father, my place at the table. But now, for the first time, I was defining myself by what I was giving. Emily and Noah had begun to blossom. Emily's debates earned her recognition at school, and she started talking about college applications. Nervously, but with a light in her eyes I had never seen before. Noah's sketches filled more and more of my apartment walls until the place looked less like a retired man's flat and more like an art studio. Every time they visited, I felt less like I was living alone and more like I was living again. Then one Saturday, As we were sitting together after dinner, Noah looked at me and asked, "Grandpa, will you be at my art show next month?" I nearly laughed through the lump in my throat. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." His grin stretched wide, and he hugged me so tightly I felt the years of absence pressing out of both of us. But Ryan was never far from the edges of our lives. Rehab had kept him contained, but not erased. Emily told me he had written her a letter. She hadn't opened it yet. She asked me if she should. I hesitated. Then I told her the truth. "Emily, I can't make that choice for you, but remember you don't owe him anything. If you read it, it should be because you want to, not because you feel guilty." She nodded, folding the envelope back into her pocket. "Maybe later." In the meantime, life continued. The day of Noah's art show arrived, held in a crowded school gymnasium lined with easels and parents snapping photos. Noah's work stood out not just because of the bright colors or careful details, but because of the hope stitched into every brushstroke. He had painted a family sitting under a tree, a grandfather, a girl, and a boy. Their faces simple but unmistakable. When I saw it, my throat closed. He hadn't painted Ryan at all. Afterward, Noah pulled me aside. "That's us. Grandpa, you, me, and Emily, that's my real family." I hugged him then, tighter than words could ever hold. Later that week, Ryan called again. His voice was clearer than before, steadier. "Dad," he said, "I'm working through the program. I want to see the kids when I'm out." I let his words hang in the air. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond with anger or lecture. I just said, "That's up to them." There was a pause on the line. Then he whispered, "I figured you'd say that." When the call ended, I sat there in silence, realizing something profound. Ryan's redemption, if it ever came, would never be my responsibility. I had spent too much of my life carrying his choices on my back. Now, they were his alone. Emily eventually opened the letter he had sent. She showed it to me one evening, her hands shaking slightly. It was filled with apologies, promises, and words that sounded more like guilt than growth. When she finished reading, she folded it back up and said simply, "I don't think he really knows who I am." I pulled her close. Maybe he never will, but I do. The more time passed, the clearer it became. The revenge I had thought I wanted the spectacle of Ryan's downfall was nothing compared to the quiet victory I was living every day. Revenge hadn't been about humiliating him. It had been about surviving him, about giving Emily and Noah the love he couldn't. That spring, Emily won first place in a regional debate. Noah's art teacher told him he had potential for scholarships. And me, I sat in the audience every time, cheering, clapping, sometimes crying, always present. I had become, at long last, what I had always wanted to be: a father figure, a protector, family. Ryan's shadow still lingered. It probably always would, but it no longer defined us. Instead, our lives were lit by the small, steady moments of choosing one another. As I lay in bed one evening, the letter from Emily on my nightstand and Noah's painting on the wall, I realized my story had come full circle. I had been cast out of my son's life for 20 years, but in losing him, I had found something far greater myself, and the two souls who had chosen me in return. And for the first time in decades, the silence didn't frighten me. It comforted me, because now, it wasn't empty, it was full of everything I had gained. The closer we moved towards summer, the more I felt the shift in our lives. What once felt like a fragile connection between me and my grandchildren had grown into something strong, steady, and undeniable. My apartment no longer felt temporary or lonely. It had become a gathering place, filled with laughter, spilled soda, and stacks of Emily's debate trophies and Noah's art supplies. One Friday evening, Emily came rushing in, her backpack half open, her voice bursting with excitement. "Grandpa, guess what I got into the honors program?" Her words spilled out in a rush as she waved a letter in front of me. I couldn't help but smile, my heart swelling with pride. Noah followed her, quieter as always. But he carried his own news. "My teacher said she wants to put my painting in the city gallery for a student showcase." He looked up at me nervously, as though waiting for my approval. I crouched down and held his shoulders. "Noah, that's incredible. You belong there." Their victories weren't mine, yet somehow, I felt them as if they were, because for the first time, I wasn't watching life from the outside, I was part of it. Still, Ryan remained on the edge of everything. From rehab, he called occasionally. Sometimes he sounded determined, other times he sounded like the same manipulator I had known for years. The kids had grown cautious. Emily no longer asked me what she should do about him. She had learned to set her own boundaries. Noah, still young, wanted nothing to do with his father, and I respected that. One night, as Emily and I washed dishes after dinner, she asked the question I had feared and anticipated in equal measure. Do you think I'll ever forgive him? The soapy plate slipped slightly in my hand. I looked at her, her face caught between strength and vulnerability. Forgiveness is tricky. I said slowly, it's not about excusing what he did, it's about letting go of what it still does to you. She tilted her head, considering, I don't know if I'm ready. You don't have to be, I assured her. Take your time. Forgiveness is yours to give or not. For a moment, her eyes softened. Then she smiled faintly. Thanks, Grandpa. That conversation stayed with me for days, because it reminded me of something I had learned the hard way. Revenge and forgiveness aren't opposites. Sometimes they're two steps on the same path. My revenge had been survival, showing Ryan that his rejection didn't destroy me. My forgiveness, what little of it I had, was choosing to no longer carry his shadow with me. The real victory wasn't over him. It was over the silence that had once defined my life. When Noah's art was displayed at the gallery, we all went together. Claire stood beside us. And though we weren't friends, there was no hostility anymore. Just a mutual recognition that we both wanted what was best for the kids. Noah's painting hung in the center of the room, the same family under a tree he had shown me before. Only this time, he had added more details. The grandfather's face had wrinkles and kind eyes. The girl looked older, taller, her hand resting on her brother's shoulder. The boy's grin was wide, his sketchbook on his lap. Above them, sunlight poured through the branches. I stood there staring at it, tears stinging my eyes. That wasn't just his art, that was his truth, his way of telling the world who his family was. Emily slipped her hand into mine as we admired it. He's really good, isn't he? The best, I said softly, just like you. That night, as I drove home alone, I realized something important. I had been given a second chance, not with Ryan, but with the ones who mattered most. I had been written off, discarded, silenced, yet here I was, living proof that broken things can still be rebuilt. Ryan's story would continue, maybe with redemption, maybe with more destruction, but mine had already found its ending, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in the laughter of my grandchildren, in the strength of their futures, and in the quiet peace I finally carried. For so long, I thought my revenge would come the day Ryan begged me for help, or the day his empire collapsed, but now I knew the truth. My revenge was this life I had built, this love that surrounded me, this family that chose me every single day. And no one, not even Ryan, could take that away again. Looking back now, I realize my story was never really about revenge against my son. It wasn't about watching him fall, or proving I was right, or making him feel the pain he had once made me feel. For a long time, I thought that was the only way I could heal, but the truth turned out to be much different. My real revenge was survival. It was showing Ryan that no matter how long he tried to erase me, I endured, and when the time came, I didn't just endure, I built something stronger. For 20 years, I lived in silence, cut off from my own child. That silence almost defined me, almost convinced me that I wasn't worthy of love or family. But the day I walked into that Christmas dinner with my briefcase, everything shifted. I didn't just bring proof of what Ryan had done, I brought back my voice. And in the months and years that followed, I discovered something even more powerful. The silence was gone, replaced by Emily's laughter, Noah's art, and the knowledge that I was no longer standing on the outside looking in. I was family again, not because Ryan allowed it, but because his children chose me. That was my victory. Not humiliation, not vengeance, but love, the kind that grows in the cracks, in the broken places, in the parts of us that we think can't be healed. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: sometimes revenge isn't about destroying the person who hurt you. Sometimes it's about refusing to be destroyed yourself. It's about reclaiming your place, your dignity, your peace. Ryan may or may not ever change. That's his story to write, not mine. But my story has found its ending. And it ends with me surrounded by the two people who matter most, building memories that no one can take away. To anyone listening who has felt cast aside, erased, or forgotten, let my story remind you, your value isn't determined by those who reject you. It's written in the love you give, the resilience you build, and the future you create for yourself. And as I sit here now, looking back at 20 years of silence and the life that grew in spite of it, I can tell you this with certainty. The best revenge isn't bitterness. The best revenge is peace. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Do you believe revenge is about striking back, or is it about rising above? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because in the end, our stories aren't just about what happens to us, they're about how we choose to write the next chapter. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real victory lies.